Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving into the absolute marvel and, honestly, the delicate fragility of the human body's Biochemical Balancing Act. We're looking at a system where millions of microscopic interactions are happening every single second, just to keep you alive and healthy. But what happens when that balance tips? Like, what actually happens when just one single molecule goes missing or an enzyme gets blocked? Well, we're going to visualize exactly how modern medicine attempts to restore order when rogue cellular processes threaten to bring the whole entire system crashing down.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our roadmap for today is pretty straightforward. 1. Precision strikes. 2. Missing pieces. 3. Unintended consequences. And 4. Toxic cascades.
Starting right off with Section 1, Precision Strikes, looking at targeted therapies.
In the past, medicine often had to rely on a real scorched earth approach to disease. Think broad, heavy immunosuppression. To understand why we desperately needed to evolve past that, let's take a look at idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, or IPF. This is a progressive disease that literally destroys the delicate, spongy architecture of the lungs. The clinical scene is tough. You've got a chronic dry cough, severe shortness of breath, and these distinct crackling sounds in the lungs. Historically, doctors just threw heavy doses of broad steroids at this, but that actually led to worse outcomes. We needed a highly specific, targeted mechanism to halt the scarring without destroying the rest of the patient's body in the process.
Enter our first precision strike. By giving a patient an oral drug called firfenidone, we can directly inhibit a specific cytokine called TGF-beta. Now, TGF-beta is basically the master switch for activating the fibroblasts that scar the lung. By suppressing this exact signaling pathway, firfenidone actually delays the decline in lung function. It doesn't magically cure the existing scars, but it safely stabilizes the disease without all that collateral damage of broad immunosuppression.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this specific chromosomal translocation, 1517. This tiny, seemingly insignificant genetic swap produces a mutant fusion protein called PML-RARA. And get this. That fusion protein is the sole driving force behind a deadly blood cancer called acute promyelocytic leukemia, or APL. It disrupts normal retinoic acid receptors, which completely halts white blood cell development, and just packs the bone marrow with dangerous, immature leukemic cells.
But here is the beauty of it. Because we know exactly what is broken in APL, we can use a drug called all-trans retinoic acid, or ATRA. I love this quote because it perfectly captures the elegance of targeted therapy. ATRA isn't a killer, it's a reformer. It binds right to that abnormal receptor and gets transcriptional activation working again. It literally forces those rogue, immature leukemic cells to grow up, mature into functional neutrophils, and then naturally die off on their own schedule.
When you compare these diseases side by side, it really highlights the hallmark of modern precision medicine. Just like ATRA targets that specific PML-RA fusion in APL, we use imatinib to target the BCR-ABL fusion protein in chronic myeloid leukemia, and rituximab to hunt down the CD20 surface antigen in B-cell lymphoma. You figure out the exact shape of the broken luck, and you design the perfect key to turn it.
Let's move on to Section 2, Missing Pieces, focusing on vitamin deficiencies.
So what happens to our biochemical balance when the lock and key are perfectly fine, but a fundamental building block is just missing? Let's walk through the biological cascade of vitamin D synthesis. It starts in your skin from sunlight or from your diet. Then it heads over to your liver where an enzyme converts it into 25-hydroxyvitamin D. Finally, it makes its way to your kidneys where another enzyme converts it into its active biological form. You absolutely need this active form to absorb calcium and phosphate from your gut. If any single one of these links breaks, the whole system collapses.
So the crucial point is that the macroscopic reality of weak, aching bones can stem from entirely different breaks in this chain. In kids, a lack of dietary intake or sunlight leads to rickets, causing skeletal deformations like both legs. But in adults, things like chronic alcoholism can severely impair that vital liver enzyme we just talked about. So even if they get plenty of sun, an adult with chronic alcoholism can't convert the vitamin D, leading to a profound mineralization defect called osteomalacia.
Understanding this missing piece is absolutely vital because it changes the treatment completely. You might look at this and think, hey, weak bones, let's give bisphosphonates to stop bone breakdown. But that is a massive logical fallacy. The problem here is not excessive bone turnover, the problem is defective mineralization. Giving bisphosphonates would actually make things worse. You can't fix a defective matrix by just suppressing remodeling. You have to replace the missing pieces, in this case vitamin D and calcium, to give the body the raw materials it needs to actually build bone.
All right, Section 3, Unintended Consequences, looking at side effects.
As we've seen, adding a chemical to the body changes the biochemical scales. But sometimes, interventions meant to heal one system inadvertently crash another. We call these iatrogenic effects. Take a look at this medical mystery. Imagine a patient gets prescribed a medication to fix their cholesterol. A few weeks later, they show up with a red, swollen, just agonizingly painful big toe. Why on earth did a cholesterol drug cause a sudden gout attack?
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact concept of drug-disease interactions. The drug in this case was niacin, or vitamin B3. Now, while niacin does a great job improving the lipid profile, it has a fatal flaw when it hits the kidneys. Niacin actually competes with uric acid for excretion in the renal proximal tubule. Essentially, niacin hogs all the exit doors, meaning uric acid can't leave the body. So it builds up in the blood, forms sharp little crystals in the joints, and boom, triggers a massive gout flare. This exact renal bottleneck is why niacin is strictly contraindicated for anyone with a history of gout.
Fortunately, we can balance the scales without triggering those awful side effects by choosing alternative targeted therapies. We can use ezetimibe to block cholesterol from being absorbed in the gut. We can use omega-3 fatty acids from fish oil to safely bring down triglycerides. Or even better, we can use fenofibrate, which not only lowers triglycerides but actually pushes the body to excrete more uric acid. It actively helps prevent gout flares while fixing the cholesterol problem. It's a win-win.
And remember, unintended consequences aren't just limited to prescription drugs. Over-the-counter, natural supplements do it too. A lot of folks take magnesium for sleep or maybe a headache, but magnesium salts are powerful osmotic agents. If you take a large pharmacological dose, they act like a magnet, drawing free water directly into your gut lumen. The unintended consequence? A very abrupt, dose-dependent watery diarrhea. Not exactly what you want when you're just trying to cure a headache, right? It's a textbook example of a predictable side effect from a natural remedy.
And finally, Section 4, Toxic Cascades and Blood Coagulation.
We're moving into our final and arguably most dramatic section here, runaway bodily systems. Let's look at disseminated intravascular coagulation, or DIC. This is a terrifying paradox. Remember APL, that leukemia we talked about earlier? Well, as those abnormal leukemic cells pile up, they release massive amounts of procoagulant granules right into the blood. This trips a systemic, widespread activation of the body's coagulation cascade. Suddenly, the patient is forming thousands of tiny blood clots absolutely everywhere. But in doing so, they are rapidly burning through all their clotting factors and platelets way faster than the body can replace them. The result is just a nightmare: simultaneous massive clotting and catastrophic, unstoppable bleeding. When we check the lab findings for a patient in DIC, the devastation is pretty clear. Clotting time tests, like PT and APTT, both are through the roof because the factors from all the pathways are completely gone. Bleeding time is way up because the platelets have all been trapped in those microclots. And we see schistocytes. These are fragmented, sheared red blood cells that have literally been sliced open as they tried to squeeze past tiny fibrin clots, blocking the microcirculation. In this state, you can't just give the patient fresh frozen plasma or platelets. You're basically adding fuel to the fire. You absolutely must stop the leukemic cascade at its source with the ATRA therapy we discussed earlier, forcing those cells to mature and stop releasing the procoagulant granules. Let's move to and see how this builds by comparing DIC to another terrifying coagulopathy, superwarfarin poisoning from rat poison. Look at how standard lab tests let us isolate the exact point of biochemical failure. DIC consumes both the coagulation factors and the platelets, but superwarfarin poisoning specifically targets vitamin K recycling. This means the clotting factors are totally depleted, driving up PT and APT, but the platelets remain perfectly normal, which means the bleeding time stays normal too. So, if a patient accidentally ingests a superwarfarin rodenticide, it completely paralyzes an enzyme in the liver called vitamin K epoxide reductase. Without this enzyme recycling vitamin K, the body can't perform the gamma carboxylation needed to activate clotting factors 2, 7, 9, and 10. So bleeding starts. And because these are long-acting poisons purposely designed to stay in the system for a long time, treating this cascade means you have to administer massive, prolonged doses of vitamin K for weeks, just to outlast the poison and restart the patient's coagulation engine.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer. The human body is this miraculous, self-regulating machine, but its complexity is also its biggest vulnerability. Whether it's a tiny chromosomal swap in leukemia, a missing enzyme in the liver, or medication fighting for space in the kidneys, the scales can tip in an absolute instant. So how can the very mechanisms that keep our blood flowing and our bones strong be so easily turned against us by a single missing molecule? It's pretty wild to think about. I really hope this look into the Biochemical Balancing Act has sparked your curiosity about the incredible cellular machinery operating inside you right now. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the science behind how we survive.